Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Passion of Financial Modeling. First of all, I want to congratulate you for signing up. I believe that the most important decision you make in wanting to learn something is the decision to get started. And I love this proverb that when the student is ready, the master emerges. I'm excited that you've decided to join up. As I mentioned in my introductory video that some of you may have seen, my goal with this course is to help you fall in love with financial modeling, because the more you fall in love with the practice of building models, I think the better you'll get at it. A bit about me before we begin. This skill of financial modeling has shaped everything I do in my career. I am currently founder and CEO of a startup called Net Equity Networks, and my company's mission is to make high-speed internet access affordable for all within the decade. And I can tell you that financial modeling is at the heart of what I do, because it is this skill that has allowed me to dissect incentives of the telecommunications industry and then figure out what was the most important intervention that was needed. What models really do is that they allow you to form visualizations of complex systems. And where I learned this skill was in my first job at Seabury Group, when I was an investment banking analyst working on restructuring and mergers and acquisitions focused on the aviation and aerospace sector. In 2009, I built this company, the Cadmus Initiative, where a big portion of my business was actually centered around teaching financial modeling, and that's why I continue to use the slide deck from Cadmus for sentimental reasons mostly. The years that followed, I ended up working. I helped establish a private equity business. I helped establish a tower sharing company. I served on the boards of two large publicly listed companies in Pakistan. And at each step, this ability to dissect financial models proved extremely useful. And my hope in this course, my intention in this course is to teach you what I've learned, what I've gathered since I started learning financial modeling from my Seabury days, and help you see the different perspectives of decision makers as and when they interact with financial models. So the curriculum of this version is divided into 10 chapters. I'm going to start by giving you an overview of on how to think about what is financial modeling. A major one area where this course is going to be very different from what you would get from, let's say, other training programs, like, and there's some really good ones like Training the Street, Wall Street Prep, Investment Banking Institute. These are fantastic programs. Where I found them lacking, which is part of the reason I decided to design this course, is that not enough is said about defining a model's purpose. Not enough is said about why a model is being built, and that often ends up creating challenges, particularly for financial analysts who tend to just jump into the exercise of building a financial model without asking them some important introspective questions first about what are we really trying to achieve. I'm going to obviously also focus on some of the more technical aspects of building a model. In this course, all of you will be building a model. You will get to do a whole bunch of practices on how to use your hands to really get fully, I would say, comfortable with using keyboard shortcuts. I'm a huge proponent of using keyboard shortcuts and just not using the mouse at all, largely because the more you can make your mind in sync with your fingers, the easier time you will have creating these models at fast speed and performing those calculations that are needed to build important mental models that help you build alignment with teams, that helps you build conviction within yourself to to stay on a certain path. I'll This course is it's centered around a case study that involves an investment fund making an investment in an airport. I chose an airport because it's a place we all often visit, but not quite often think about what could be the operating model of an airport. I will be helping you dissect a number of different operating models. I'll help you think of ways through which you can dissect the business model of pretty much any entity that you come across. And beyond that, I'm going to help you think of some frameworks that will help you go from thinking about how a business makes money to tying all of that into a set of financial statements. And then finally, turning all of those insights into a decision-making dashboard. Because again, a model's purpose is to help answer questions, and fulfilling a model's purpose requires you to design a clean dashboard that helps the user play around with certain inputs and see certain very relevant outputs. If some of this is sounding like gibberish, just bear with me. It's going to start becoming clearer as we go down each chapter. So let's start with the overview. What is a financial model? You'll hear me talk a lot about mental models. One mental model I want you to try to visualize is something called this cone of possibility. And a lot of times practitioners of financial models get hung up on this idea that their forecasts are so accurate. I would say that the purpose of your model is not to build a super accurate forecast. It's to help a number of decision makers visualize this cone of possibility that is going to be a range of preferable futures, probable futures, and plausible futures. And the more you can the more accurately you can define this cone, the positive outcome that happens is that when surprises occur, there is limited heartache and I love this little equation that happiness is reality minus expectations. And so a very important first step in putting together a financial model is thinking about aligning expectations of decision makers from whom you want something done. The other mental model that I want you to pair with the cone of possibility is the three financial statements: the income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow. And when you pair these two mental models, where you try to paint the cone of possibility in a series of financial statements, the result is a financial model. So for me, a financial model is a cone of possibility represented as projected financial statements. What I think it's important to talk about, what are the goals of a financial model? And before getting into these goals, some of you may have come across this lovely visual where a bunch of people who can't see touching an elephant. They would not be able to give you an accurate depiction on what they're feeling, right? Like some may be thinking it's a fan, some may be thinking it's a wall, some may be thinking it's a rope. And what a model is supposed to do is that it's supposed to create a vantage point to help you visualize a large complex system. I mean, so if you can try to imagine this, a model is something that lets you zoom out to see the elephant. An important goal in building a model is testing how assumptions alter the cone of possibility. So, I mean, going back to the elephant analogy, if the cone of possibility is trying to imagine how big the elephant is going to be, then you want to think about how changing assumptions, certain assumptions can alter the size of the elephant. So for me, here's how I think of a modeling goal. A great financial model generates a shared mental model of a business, and shared mental models have proven to be extremely useful in video games and in the game of chess as well. It's I mean, when grandmasters play in world championship matches, they have other grandmasters advising them on strategy, because the reason they can do this is because they have shared mental models on how various chess pieces move. So think of this visual that when you are building a financial model, what you really are trying to do is help build a shared mental model between the users of that model in order to build alignment. I've written an article about this idea as well. I call it shared mental models for boardrooms, and in that I found a paper that talked about how it was a 2017 paper. It talked about how League of Legends, it is a video game, League of Legends players who had an accurate shared mental model of the game were able to perform so much better, because they were actually able to anticipate what others are going to do. And imagine having something like that in your business or between your board and your management. This idea of building shared mental models, it's really powerful. But that's an ideal, right? Like, to be able to build a shared mental model. The part where things go wrong in a financial model is failure to define a purpose. And you must have come across this situation. And it goes like this. A model arrives in your mailbox, you open it, and it's got 20 tabs. And you don't even know where to get started. It's got so much functionality, so many options, so many graphs that you look at it and you're lost. What is this model trying to say? What is this model trying to get me to do? And it's a great example of scope creep. Probably the person who built the financial model completely understands every little aspect of it, but that person often forgets his or her audience. And so scope creep is a concept I believe is not talked about enough, but really needs to be thought through when you are building a financial model. And the first step, I believe, when you want to start building a model is to write a statement of purpose. It's like this is like the why does this model exist? And it's just like with companies as well. When companies don't have a clearly defined why, they become a bit of something for everyone, and those companies don't tend to be great companies. I mean, you have to have a clearly defined why. Going back to something Simon Sinek says, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So defining this statement of purpose is absolutely critical in a financial model. And I want to give you some examples on how to think about the statement of purpose. So an okay answer would be that, okay, I'm building a financial model because I want to raise capital for my business. But a good answer would be that I want to help my co-founder understand financial implications of raising capital. This second answer has identified the model user, and it's also identified what you want as an outcome. You want to manage your co-founder's expectations. You want your co-founder to understand how raising different amounts of capital under different terms could impact his or her dilution once investors come in. Similarly, an okay answer would be that I want to raise debt financing from my bank. But a good answer would be that I want to help my banker obtain approval from his credit committee. Again, now we've identified the user, it's the banker. And this banker is going to be going to his or her credit committee to obtain certain approvals. The credit committee has a bunch of processes. They've got a bunch of metrics, leverage ratio, coverage ratio, debt to capital. They've got a bunch of these covenants that need to be honored before the bank can approve a loan. So a good model would put these kind of metrics right up front and help the banker make it easier for the banker to talk to his or her credit committee. And then similarly, I've listed a couple of other examples that, it's like, but broadly, the idea, I mean, actually, let's do one more example, right? Like, a very common, like merger models are quite common, right? Like this is, if you were to do a training, like a whole set of training courses with the I would call them the current suite of financial modeling training services that are available. They'll teach you how to build a leverage buyout model, a merger model, but and these models again focus on the mechanics of creating financial statements. And so, in this situation, an okay answer for a model's purpose would be, hey, I want to acquire a competitor. And so the traditional thought process of building financial models would say, okay, you need to build a merger model. But a good answer which says that, I want to obtain approval on valuation range from my board investment committee. If that's the first step that you need to do, frankly, your board investment committee is not going to care about the credits and debits of your pro forma balance sheet that emerge, or how much goodwill is getting calculated. They're going to have much more basic questions. And if you've jumped to accounting specifications and not really talked about laying the right building blocks, what's going to happen is you'll be just talking past each other. Happens all the time. I've seen this in boardrooms time and time again. What really drives this disconnect between managers and board members is something I call curse of knowledge. And it's not my term, but I mean, it's a curse of knowledge. Just means that when you know something, it just appears so obvious to you that you fail to provide context. And that's the most important word in this whole discipline of financial modeling: context. Provide sufficient context. And so a good purpose statement of a financial model is one that identifies the model user and specific action required to achieve a certain objective. It's the more that your model's purpose statement does this, the easier time you'll have battling against scope creep and providing the right kind of context and fighting the curse of knowledge that often stands in the way between you and making the right decision. Now, I want to talk to you about this idea of an optimal Zoom level. There is this term that it's a cliche that a lot of people say that, and very often heard in boardrooms. Sometimes it's a bit nauseating, but people say that, don't miss the forest for the trees. Don't overlook the big picture. It's a nice idea, but what this idea overlooks is that sometimes you have to get into the weeds. And so you as a modeler, you need to figure out what is the right Zoom level that you want, and that's something only you will know. So for example, if you are introducing an idea to, let's say, an investor for the first time, a regulator for the first time, a board member for the first time, or to your team for the first time, that's the time to talk about the forest. Right? At that point, you need to be able to see the big picture. But the more that you start figuring out what that idea is, you need to start getting into the weeds. And there, you need to increase that Zoom level. So achieving Zoom alignment with the model user helps overcome this curse of knowledge, and it results in better decision making. And this is a really important mental model to keep in mind, other than the cone of possibility, this idea of an optimal Zoom level. And as you build your model, your Zoom level will keep on increasing, which is, by the way, the reason that a lot of times you end up in this situation where a model has built all this functionality. It's already gotten into the trees. And this is a common feature. Management comes up with an idea, builds a lot of thought process behind it, gets into the trees, and will then often go to their boardrooms and present the Zoom level, which is frankly a bit too narrow. And that creates challenges, right? So think about like recognize this idea that, for one particular idea, you may have many different versions of a financial model, and fight this temptation to use one model for everything. I mean, if your model is being built for a budgeting exercise, then do a budgeting exercise. Don't try to use that model to justify a capital expansion. We're going to be talking more about this as we go along, but before we continue, I want to talk to you a bit about financial modeling best practices, and these are, I would say, these are generally accepted. I think for me, the single most important one is this color coding scheme, and you have to absolutely become militant with yourself about it. The inputs have to be blue, the links have to be green, the calculations have to be black. And the reason for this is, if it informs future users on what what a particular, how they can, which parts of the model they can manipulate, which parts of the model they cannot manipulate. Another really important practice I am a big believer in is that you don't want to link cells to a different sheet, because when you link cells to a different sheet, if both the sheets are not available to the model user, you will end up getting that very common error that you see in spreadsheets that, oh, this sheet has links to other sheets. Do you want to update? That's no good. You want your spreadsheet to be self-contained. Again, it goes back to, you want your spreadsheet to aid in decision making, not necessarily show that here's all the thought process that I've thought through, right? Don't embed inputs and formulas. Break them out into separate line items. Similar idea, like, don't assume that someone will just magically know why you inserted a 4% escalator. Spell it out. Recognize that when you are building financial models, you're also trying to create institutional memory, and the quality of those memories is going to be proportional to the quality of your documentation. So don't be sloppy. And it's tempting to be sloppy. It's tempting to just do quick fixes, but those are no good. Those are bad for institutional memory, and that never really helps. Never input the same number twice. Let Excel flow and be dynamic. You want you don't need like link cells, as opposed to, so that when this is a very important discipline to practice when you're building dashboards, and you'll see that as we go around to building dashboards, that when you have kept your inputs neatly contained, your ability to move those inputs to a dashboard becomes that much easier. And there are a number of other best practices that are self-explanatory that I'm not going to go into enormous details at this time. But as we start getting into the spreadsheet, and as we start getting into using the Excel file, I'm going to start showing you examples of why these practices matter. So let's pause over here. I'd like you to open the Excel spreadsheet that accompanies this, and I just want you to spend some time getting acquainted with it, and do not use the mouse. Try to navigate the spreadsheet using just the keyboard, and in the next section I will help you navigate. I will give you some tips on what you can do to navigate your spreadsheet. If there's one thing you want to remember the Alt key, and unfortunately this is not going to work very well on a Macintosh. For some reason Mac has still not figured out how to activate the Alt key. It's beyond me. I mean, a bunch of other shortcuts still work on Mac, but I just want to be upfront that your ability to really master shortcuts on a Macintosh are going to be limited. I am going to be assuming that you are using a PC, or at least you have the ability to use the Alt key. And where possible, I'll mention, which parts, which shortcuts can be used. So open your spreadsheets that come accompanying with this course, and let's start navigating that spreadsheet before we get into the Cadmus modeling framework.